Here's Jamie Hanshaw.
How is everybody? Good. I love all your faces. Good to see everybody. It's like old friends here. So today we're going to talk a little bit about movies, a fun subject, kind of going back to the beginning of time and to the ancient gods, because what we're seeing now is that people in Hollywood and the industry is being worshipped like it is a religion, and it actually takes from religion. And so let's just get right into it, because Hollywood is really, when you look at it closely, it's a religion of its own, and it's actually a composite of ancient religions called the mysteries. And we will see how the ancient priests banded together to form exclusive secret societies who performed sacred dramas at stated periods in time. And many of the mystery schools chose plays as a path of initiation. So there were varying degrees and many levels of priesthoods, as most magical orders have hierarchies, but these priests were born into families of priests and priestesses, and they assumed the destiny of their family bloodline when their predecessors died. So secrets were told within families about the mystery teachings and the rites and passages of initiation, things that common people never were privy to, that kind of information. So outsiders were only permitted to join after a long course of study and fasting and ritual and a lifetime of dedication. And sometimes these initiation rituals could be extremely cruel. So there's a good quote that I found about the beginning of the idea of play acting and actors invoking gods into themselves to portray on the stage for people to watch. So it says the earliest gods were invoked by a ritual act, the dramenon, meaning the thing done, such as a sacrificial dance, commemorating the fact that our life begins and ends when the gods call upon us. And subsequently, the thing was said as well as done, and the dramenon was on its way to becoming the drama. So once speech within the temple precincts had been endowed with the power of word magic, we have the invocation, properly so called. So these first plays were, like I said, just people thinking that they actually were invoking the god or goddess on the planet. So these initiations, these theatrical performances, where the mysteries of the universe were supposedly revealed to the initiate, and he himself played a role. And in the one example that I have is the third or sublime degree of Freemasonry, where the candidate plays the role of Grandmaster Hiram Biff. And this is from the movie From Hell on the left, and then you see Pink at a VMA Awards, and so he's got his hoodwink on, his cable toe, his pant leg rolled up, and his chest bared. And then you can see Pink doing the exact same thing at the VMAs. So in the golden age of Hollywood, around the late 1920s or the mid-1940s, the film industry had actually operated under the studio system. And this means that certain companies controlled practically every process of the actor's life. They controlled the filmmaking, the production, the distribution, the exhibition. So they were just like a powerhouse of their own. And so although you'll hear a lot of people talk about how the Jews run Hollywood or whatever, it's actually more of a composite of secret societies. And one of these they actually operate in is the Masons. And so the most powerful Hollywood moguls in the beginning of that 20th Century Fox and WB, Jack Warner of Warner Brothers, Daryl Zanuck, Louis B. Mayer of MGM, Paramount Pictures, Carl, somebody told me how to pronounce this, I don't know if you're here, is Laemmle? Laemmle? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, in addition to them being the Hollywood moguls, they were also Freemasons. And this is the El Capitan Theater in downtown Hollywood. It's across the street from the Kodak Center where they have the Academy Awards. And this was actually a Masonic building before Disney bought it. And right next door they have Jimmy Kimmel Live in the old Masonic temple. And so they're always like mixing new corporations and with Masonic tradition. So also it's kind of reflected, the importance of Masonry in Hollywood is reflected in that the Academy Awards used to be held at the Shrine Auditorium, which is owned by the Scottish Rite. So many of the rituals of Freemasonry, they're actually based on trials that candidates were subjected to by the ancient Hierophants during initiation. And it is believed that Hiram Biff was an initiate of the Dionysus architects and builders. And so here we have Dionysus. And this is from the movie, Disney movie Hercules. And it's funny because, you know, Dionysus is the ultimate god of party and revelry, and he was actually called the god that comes. And so you can see some innuendos right here in the photo. What's he doing to Hercules right there, right? But it's true that many of these ancient mystery schools were centered around sex. And so the Dionysian mysteries, they used drugs and other trance-inducing techniques such as dance and music to remove the inhibitions and social constraints for the purpose of what they think to return the individual to their animalistic, beast-like state. And so basically they were always constantly pushing the boundaries of what was considered taboo. And the initiation rituals for men at puberty were for the purpose of identifying the males as the god Dionysus, as this, you know, sexy, drunken character. And then they even had, you know, initiation rituals for women where the young girl would have to become the bride of Dionysus, and so you know what that entails. But so if you thought that, you know, Miley Cyrus's current behavior was a little inappropriate, you should have seen the shenanigans going on in the mystery schools in ancient Greece, because it was nothing new under the sun, and this is just, it's all happened before, and now it's coming back to happen in the public eye. So in the Roman mythology, like I said, Dionysus became Bacchus, and he's the ultimate party god. And so that's why like a drunken orgy is still called a bacchanalia, and for good reason, because these people would whip themselves into a frenzy of intoxication. And in the spring, women would attend their secret ceremonies in their name, and because he was the god of fertility, right? And he had this divine role as a liberator of morality. And his wild and like untamed nature is a lot of times depicted as a large predatory cat. So it's interesting now that in the popular culture, hermaphroditic symbolism is coming out a lot. Transgender is a big issue right now, because Dionysus himself was actually imagined as a hermaphrodite. And if he wore any clothes at all, they were effeminate. And his springtime festivals included cross-dressing. And these large cats are also associated with Hercules, who in the mythos is a lover of Dionysus. And they were often depicted in drinking contests and brawling and lovemaking and things like that. So these Dionysian mysteries, like many other mystery schools, consisted of two sets of rites. And these were the secret rites of initiation and the public rites. And so for Greece and Rome, the stage was a sacred place where they're invoking the gods, right? And where the dramaturgical interactions of the gods were the form of magical invocation. And so these actors would don the costumes of the gods, and the playwright scripting the narrative would indoctrinate the masses into the appropriate morals of the state, or what they thought were appropriate morals, right? So it was, in the beginning of theater, there were two kinds of people, the initiates and the profane. So there were, in other words, there were those that get it and those that don't. And so in the world of Harry Potter, you have the magicians and the muggles. So it's the people who can see what's being acted in front of them and the people who it goes right over their heads, right? So every pagan nation, it had like not only its state religion, but the religion that the illuminated ones gained entrance. And so since these initiates thought themselves to be physically and morally superior to everyone else, they believed that the masses had to be led like a flock of sheep and taught what to think in a simple language. So public plays were highly sponsored by the aristocratic class, but only the discerning few knew the esoteric message, while the majority received only the literal interpretation. And the opinions of the masses, the crowd, were shaped by play acting and drama and stories and tales and myths, and this is an early example of social engineering through theater. So we were talking yesterday about the Hollywood, and actually that's the interesting point, and I put it in the book, is that the symbol of the oak tree is something that the Druids used to worship their supreme deity. The Druids were very skilled magicians. And there's this enduring legend in Druidism about the battle of the Oak King and the Holly King. And the Oak King controls the light half of the year, and the Holly King the dark side. And so both of these are kind of identified with the god Pan, who I talk about a lot in Weird Stuff Part 2. And the holly tree is what they would use to make magic wands from. And even J.K. Rowling has acknowledged this when she says that Harry Potter's wand is made of Hollywood and a phoenix feather, which the phoenix is a bird of that's associated with mystery schools, right? So she says it's made of Hollywood and a phoenix feather, which is also a very important symbol. I gave Harry a wand made of Hollywood back in 1990 when I first drafted Chapter 6 of Philosopher's Stone. It was not an arbitrary decision. Holly has certain connotations that were perfect for Harry, particularly when contrast traditional associations of you from which Voldemort's wand is made. So, yeah, the holly has always been thought to have supernatural powers. So let's talk about Hollywood royalty a little bit, and royalty, which is gross. But today, the masses, they worship celebrities the way that the ancient people worship the gods. And many even make pilgrimages to the Holy Land of Hollywood to, in hopes to see their deities in the flesh. And for some people, life-changing movies such as Star Wars or The Matrix is the closest thing to a spiritual experience that they will ever have. So you may have noticed how often we see celebrities and world leaders walking upon these red carpets, right? Just like they do at the Academy Awards. And this is a motif representing the blood path or the bloodline coming down from the past and running into the future. And along with winning politicians, so many celebrities happen to be descended from royalty. So now I feel like there's another revolution taking place in America. It's a royal revolution. Looking at the tabloids and the media coverage of royal families and pink princess programming for young girls and pop culture's current obsessions for all things of the monarchy. I mean, how many times do we go to buy our groceries and look at the tabloids and it's all Prince William and Kate Middleton and Queen of England and all these royals, right? Who gives a crap? But, it's almost like the Revolutionary War never happened at all because, 240 years ago, people were dying, so they didn't have to give a crap what the royal family was doing. So we could all think of ourselves as sovereign and not have to worship these leaders, right? So from the coverage of the royal family to the cross-generational appeal of the royal fairy tale wedding, these kings and queens have reconquered us quietly using children's cartoons and pop music. And here I have an example of just one tiny example of the royalty programming that's going on in pop culture. This is Katy Perry's new perfume called Killer Queen. and you can take that for what you will. But let's talk a little bit about how the idea of royalty and the kingship even came into our consciousness as a species, okay? So understanding the paradigm of this Hollywood royalty programming will take us all the way back to the beginning of civilization. And the leading deities of the Sumerian creation were the sky god Anu, the earth goddess, and the air god, and the water god. And so they were like primordial representations of natural forces, right? But there is a lot of evidence to suggest that they were also sort of supernatural, giant, humanoid, flying beings that came and meddled in people's lives and affairs. And when they would arrive, the people's eyes would stare at them. These are some gypsum figurines that they found in Iraq, and these would actually stand in for worshipers worshiping the gods at the altar. And this is how they portrayed people looking at the gods with eyes this big, right? So the Sumerian people, they tended to take a kind of tragic view of mankind and his fate and his destiny. They weren't very optimistic about being on the planet at all. They believed that the gods made man from clay and created them for a single purpose, which was to serve the gods by supplying them with food, drink, and shelter so that they might have leisure for their divine activities. And in ancient Assyrian philosophy, creation was considered as a covenant between heaven and earth as long as the humans served the gods until their death. And so have you ever wondered why certain families of the world, they claim imminent rulership over the rest of humanity and make it their life's purpose to produce male heirs to the throne and keep their bloodlines pure? Here's a fact that goes right over most people's heads, is that most of the world's royal families will trace their lineage back to a supernatural ancestor. So I'm thinking of King Arthur and his myth, right? And so the first kings, like I'll get to in a second, Gilgamesh, he thought that he was 2/3 God. And so they say that their kingship, their divine right to rule was let down from heaven, meaning that these early beings that men considered gods, they would have their city-states that was dedicated to the one God, and they were often at war with each other. And so Babylonian and Mesopotamian kings, they legitimized themselves through the fact that they came from ancient ruling families, these ancient aliens, gods, Nephilim. You know, you can fill in the blank with your own understanding about that, but they were beings that were not human, that were creating civilization. And so these kings, they would emphasize the fact that they came from the eternal seed, and even the word Anunnaki means princely seed. And so if you've ever heard of the word Anunnaki before, you know what I'm talking about. But according to their history, the gods created the king directly following the creation of humans so that he could guide the humans correctly. And one of the first cities in the world was called Uruk, and one of its kings was the renowned Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh, like I said, he thought of himself as 2/3 God and 1/3 man. And his mortality is the conflict of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the oldest texts that's ever been discovered in the world, probably the first book ever written. And he was always very vexed because he was part human, and only the gods live forever, and he wanted to live forever. So in Gilgamesh's character, we see somewhat of a person who is obsessed with fame and intense preoccupation with his reputation, and sort of a revolt against his part man nature. And then on the other slide next to him is Enkidu, which Enkidu was a sort of beastmaster who was born with the wild animals, and in the story they want to tame him so that he can be a companion to Gilgamesh, because Gilgamesh is wearing out the humans with his decrees and his ruling that all the brides had to first be with him on their wedding night before they could be with their husband. So the people of Sumer were like, we need help, so they go to the gods, and the gods create Enkidu so that Gilgamesh could have somebody to wrestle with and preoccupy him. And Enkidu was actually subdued in the story from the wilderness to come to the city to be friends with Gilgamesh by a prostitute. So we'll get into prostitution in just a second. But the tales of these ancient gods, it proves that they were never benevolent, all-knowing, all-loving deities, only that they were physically and technologically superior. So they were given to all manner of earthly desires and emotions and competitiveness, hunger, fear, jealousy, sadness, anger, and love. Their contention and their empire building and their city-state building were the driving force behind early civilization, and human beings in these stories were simply caught in the middle, under the will of the gods, right? And under them were the priests. So we were talking about the priesthood a little bit before, and the temples of the gods were always in the heart of the city, and that's what the city was built around. And they were served by a perpetual priesthood, and these were the writers, teachers, scholars, astrologers, and this priest class was almost the most elite class because they dictated the religion, right? So a priest could be above a king because he had the spiritual power. And so almost all of the temporal power of society was in the hands of the priests of these mystery schools and the estates that they managed, which was the entire city almost. So this is Inanna, and this is the Sumerian goddess who overshadowed and outlasted all of the other gods at the time. She is the goddess with 1,000 names and 1,000 incarnations, and she was worshipped in a great temple in Uruk along with the father of the gods, Anu, and she was known as the Queen of Heaven, both an awful and lovely goddess of love, war, sex, and death. And so she is probably the most important goddess of the entire history, and we'll get into why I think that this is what's being incarnated through popular culture at this time. So she was always depicted as both a shy virgin and also a sensuous mistress, and she was a powerful warrior who drove a chariot drawn by lions, which were her sacred animal. And it's interesting, at the beginning of time, you have these hunter-gatherers that are just starting to form towns and cities and things, and then you have the arrival of these beings, and then you have a ziggurat. So it's like, how did these people go from living in mud huts to building ziggurats and accomplishing great feats of architecture? And it was the arrival of these beings, and that they're depicting right here. And so they came to love the city and more than nature and more than wilderness. I mean, the Sumerians, if you read their testimonies, they loved civilization more than Carrie Bradshaw loves New York City, right? Like, it's the same idea, this metropolis, the idea of getting everybody together, concentrated, so that they're more easily controllable, and that they don't get the divine energies from the nature that they're supposed to be getting, because we're all surrounded by buildings and bricks and streets and cars and everything that disconnects us from, God and creation, right? So Inanna's strongest cults were in the cities that were most notable for trade, such as Phoenicia, where also Freemasonry comes from. And they despised the wilderness, and their definition of a wicked and a person was an uncivilized person who lived in the mountains and didn't practice agriculture. So it was Inanna herself who was most responsible for civilization as we know it in the first place, because there is a story where Inanna arrives in Uruk, her city, and she arrives with these objects they call the May. It's pronounced May, but it's spelled M-E. And these were the various types of supernatural objects and ideas that amounted to civilization. So where does the idea of real estate come from? Kingship. Let's see the list here. It says Oh, it says the May is a set of rules and regulations assigned to each cosmic entity and cultural phenomenon for the purpose of keeping it operating forever. So the way that she obtains the May is in a very Luciferian way, and you could almost say that Inanna has a lot in common with Lucifer because he was the one that took the fire from gods and brought it down back to earth for mankind to enlighten him. But in this story, she is called the Holy Torch, which is also a symbol of Lucifer. And she was anxious to increase the welfare and prosperity of Uruk and make it the center of civilization, the center of the world, right? And so she goes to the realm of the gods, and she gets drunk with Enki, one of the creator gods, and he gives her the May and says, these are yours and you can take these back to your city. And so basically you are the queen of earth now because you have this set of rules for governing humanity. So in this list, there's like almost 100 things listed, including crowns, tiaras, the throne, the staff, the measuring rod and line. You can see on the right side, she's holding like a circle and a bar. So this is how they would measure off real estate for agriculture and planting, is they would take a stick and put it in the ground and then tie a rope around it. Very easy way to, partition off pieces of land for real estate and ownership. She also brought the idea of priests and priestesses. She brought the idea of the sacred marriage, of weapons, ceremonial robes, hairstyles, lovemaking. I mean, the list goes on and on. Music, the art of the hero, metalworking, fire. So there you go. So she brought fire to mankind. The May were the Sumerian values and governing structures that organized their society. And they were conferred by the gods onto the king priests, who was supposed to be like the god on earth. And he was the representative of the god on earth. And it was his job to ensure the continuation of the civilization the way that the gods saw fit. So Inanna's May also included public lovemaking and the kissing of the phallus and temple prostitution. And these were ritualistically performed during their New Year's festivals in the spring and autumn called the Akitu. And so imagine coming out twice a year to see your neighbors going at it on the designated day, because this was the day for fertility. And the idea of doing this in public came from these ancient gods. So, if you were Sumerian, you might not have been so shocked at what you were seeing on television today, because maybe it was nothing compared to back then. But there's a good quote here. It says, "Our own demographic is very strange in comparison to the usual experience of humankind. Young people moved to the cities of their own free will, so their cities were essentially young adult societies. The closest modern comparison would be the mid-1960s when the baby boomers came of age. When the baby boomers were young adults, the elderly still were not living that long, and birth control became readily available. It was the age of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was similar to Sumerian society." So, the Akkadians of Mesopotamia, they incorporated the Sumerian culture wholesale and melded their goddess Inanna with Ishtar. And so the identification of these two goddesses was partly due to Sargon the Great, a great king, not a great one, but an important one, who conquered Sumer and most of Western Asia. And so to help him control the restless and rebellious populations of the Sumerian cities, he appointed his daughter as high priestess and spouse of the moon god and of the sky god in Uruk. And so for 40 years, she held this priestly office and wielded great power among the Mesopotamians. And she elevated the Inanna-Ishtar hybrid as the supreme goddess of the empire and gave her the rank the Queen of Heaven. And she is remembered today primarily as the first poet in recorded history who actually has a name. It was a woman. So it was at this time that the insatiable ambition of kings was transformed from the idea of winning the favor of the goddess of love and war to rule their city-states into one of more of a world domination. And so Ishtar had been worshipped by sacred prostitution in her earlier incarnation as Inanna. The practice reached its height in Babylon, which is why the goddess is remembered in Christian mythology as the whore of Babylon. And so besides the many full-time temple whores that they had working there, the act of this sacred prostitution, they told them that it was a way for women to identify with the goddess and receive her blessing and fertility, and for men to be blessed by the conjugation with Inanna's representative. And so this type of religious sexuality might sound glamorous, but it is highly unlikely that the prostitutes were voluntary. Prostitution is slavery. I don't think anyone is going to argue that, but they tried to make it as glamorous and sexy and desirable and not as shameful as we all know it is. And so what I have here is a medieval representation of the whore of Babylon on her great dragon with the heads and the beast of the abyss, and it's actually Lady Gaga, right? I don't know if I should throw this in, but if you are more interested in learning about that, we did a very good special on the Katy Perry Super Bowl ritual, when she arrived in the Super Bowl on top of the lion, right, which was Inanna's animal, holding the reins in a flaming dress, just like the Lust card from Aleister Crowley. So if you're more interested in that, I would suggest you check it out. But Ishtar was referred to as the goddess who could change men into women and vice versa. So androgynous priests and priestesses were called reed people, and they served in temples as seers of the divine. So people with atypical sexuality were given special status in ancient Sumer and were thought to have abilities of supernatural religious value. And so the Mesopotamian interpretation of Ishtar is a gender bender, and as the morning star, Venus is her planet, and in the morning it is male, and in the evening is female, and so in Greece it's also Aphrodite. And so this could be a reason why we are seeing this trend of mixing the genders together, because I think that they're trying to incarnate these ideas from the beginning of time. So ancient people were fascinated by hermaphrodites. The spring Akitu festival, along with the public ritual of the sacred marriage that was performed by the king and the priestess of Inanna, they also had a parade of cross-dressed worshipers who would wear half men and half woman costumes. And so with a devotional ceremony, they would honor Inanna and rejoin themselves to her light. And so androgynous clothing was symbolic of the goddess, and they believed that she existed as the opposite sex in each person. So taverns were also brothels, and they were sacred to the goddess. And sex with a prostitute, like we were talking before, was a religiously sanctioned activity. And this gets pretty dark because boys and girls became prostitutes as children because they were raised in this, and only allowed to exit the whorehouse and serve in other capacities when they reached adulthood. So temple prostitution was so common in the ancient world that there are many specific verses in the Bible that actually condemn this practice, right? So by the Iron Age, Ishtar was well integrated into the pantheon of most religions, and so all goddesses that you see springing up through history, you can trace them back to Inanna. And on the left, you see a statue that they found, and these were actually rigged with water, so they would spout water from that little hole that she's holding right there. And so throughout the literature in the Bronze Age, kings declared that they were the lovers of Inanna Ishtar, and the story of the courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi established the principle of the sacred marriage for fertility. And it was the relationship between the king and the goddess that was the king's source of power. So human kings of Uruk, they claimed legitimacy to the throne by their emulation of Dumuzi, who was Inanna's husband, and his favorable relationship with her. So here, the high priestess would unite with the king of the land, who represented Dumuzi, and this important festival, like we were talking about, would last for many days and occur around the time of the autumn equinox. So the cult of priests, they really benefited from preserving the sacred marriage rituals because this legitimized new kings coming in to conquer. So when a new king would come and conquer the city, instead of being slaughtered, the priest would come out and say, it's Inanna's will that you have won this battle. You can have our city as long as you keep our ritual and, continue to have this sacred fertility public ritual for the people. You're the new king as long as you're making love to Inanna in public. And so it's kind of a win-win for whoever won that city, right? But what does this have to do with Hollywood? Oh, here's another picture of, this is called the investiture of Zimri Lim, King Zimri Lim, and you can see Inanna passing the divine right of rulership with the rod and the circle right there to Zimri Lim. So Hollywood has been associated with ancient Babylon since its very inception. And during the onset of the Great Depression, many Americans believed that the country's financial hardships were the result of a moral decline. So they were really harping a lot on Hollywood and blaming Hollywood for the ills of the country. And they called it Babylon and Sin City. And so really no ancient city is more famous for its mysteries than Babylon, whose name literally means gate of the gods. And this is Marduk, right here. And this is from a cartoon called I Am the City from the Real Ghostbusters. And we'll talk a little bit more about Marduk in a second. But Babylon was very much like Los Angeles in the ancient world as an important center of popular culture. And it's not surprising that, the astrology and the star chart comes from Babylon. And in the ancient times, the ziggurat of Etementanki towered over the city, and it was ruled by the god king Marduk. This is just a cartoon, but you can go and look at ancient depictions of Marduk. But he, let's see. So things kind of changed a little bit when Babylon became the center because the rites and rituals switched from the focal point being Inanna and the king in the sacred marriage ritual, from that to Marduk gaining power over the gods and becoming the king of the gods and the king of Babylon at the same time. So here is the Kodak Theater in the center of downtown Hollywood and Highland. And this opened in 2001, and it is the permanent home of the Academy Awards. And so this is where the Hollywood royalty parades down the red carpet on their way to receiving the Oscars. And the decor is taken from the 1916 movie Intolerance by a Freemason, who's D.W. Griffith. And the ancient Babylonian story in the movie depicts the conflict between Prince Belshazzar of Babylon and Cyrus the Great of Persia. And in the film, the intolerant priests of Marduk, who's also called Bel, attempt to suppress the worship of Ishtar and betray their king. So that's the old movie that this is taken from, but this is also an interesting arch in itself, right? Because this is the Babylon courtyard, they call it, and they have 4-story columns topped with standing elephants, and if you look through there, you can actually see the Hollywood sign in the background, right? So on either side of the arch are 2 curious characters. The figure on the left holding the basin of water is similar to the winged genie of Assyrian iconography, and they appear in the reliefs and walls throughout palaces and temples in various ways. And this one is actually on the left. I would say that this is Enki, or Ea, because he was always depicted as a god of water who held a pot of water in his hands or with streams of water erupting from his body. And the creature on the right, do I have a better one? Yeah. There's a Syrian eagle god named Nusku, who was originally depicted as holding a pine cone-like object. I guess you can see it a little bit in here. In the originals, it's a lot bigger and more pronounced, but they've kind of shrunk his little pine cone in his hand. But he is the messenger of Marduk and a god of the stylus. So then the squiggly thing between them, this is the Assyrian tree of life, and this was the original tree of life thousands of years before the Kabbalah, depending on which tradition you ascribe to. But there appears to be a general consensus among experts that this tree was related to creation and fertility, and it's a representation of the human body and the ideal man. And it also refers to the organization of the material world by Marduk. And the king is portrayed as the human personification of the tree, and in some representations, the king actually takes the place of the tree of life. So, the grand entrance into the city of Babylon was called the Ishtar Gate, and it's made with blue bricks and decorated with approximately 120 lions, and which is why it's sometimes called the Lion's Gate. And it was excavated in the 20th century and reconstructed in a museum, and it's now at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. That's where you can find this thing. And so during the celebrations of these New Year's Akitu festivals, statues of the deities were paraded through the gate and down the processional way for everyone to worship. And isn't it interesting that so many film companies have this lion motif? There's Lionsgate films. There's and Lionsgate actually brought us the Twilight and the Hunger Games and American Psycho and all of these negative movies. But I just thought that was very interesting that, you know, the Lionsgate of Babylon, and now you have the Lionsgate production company, right? So this is in Hollywood, and then you can see the little winged genie and the king. Only in Los Angeles can you visit an Assyrian ziggurat and buy corporate crap at a discount. This is an outlet mall. The Citadel Outlet Mall in Commerce, California is built in 1929, and this is a replica of the fortress of Dur-Shurukin of Sargon II, and complete with all the battle scenes, the winged genie, the wing bulls, and the human head guy is called the Lamassu. So the Syrians were very hated. They were one of the most fearsome and warlike and barbaric civilizations that we've ever studied in history. So the tales of their bloodthirst and sadism and their perfection at war. So having an Assyrian-themed outlet mall is kind of like having a Nazi-themed farmer's market. It's like, it doesn't make sense, but so let's talk about sorcery for a second. Because if it only takes 6 degrees to get to Kevin Bacon in Hollywood, it takes even less to get to Aleister Crowley. And Thelema, in my opinion, is the hidden religion of the 20th century. And Hollywood is one of the main epicenters for global sorcery and mind control. And so movies are magical ceremonies, and their mode of operation is mimicry or sympathy. And some directors know exactly the potent magic power of movies and use it to enlighten or enslave, depending on the makers, right? So 2 hours in front of the screen, watching a movie like The Matrix could sufficiently initiate even the most naive person to the level of the first degree of occult apprentice if they realize what they're watching. So Aleister Crowley's religion, and if you saw in the beginning of the very first slide, that was from the Game of Thrones, and that is their their religion in that show, and it has this same seal of Babylon. So we were talking about Inanna, Ishtar, Whore of Babylon. This is what the goddess is turning into now. They're using, Thelemites believe that their goddess Babylon is a composite of Kali and Ishtar and the Whore of Babylon from Revelation. So his motto of "do what thou wilt" is the anthem of the music industry, if you listen closely. And even though he died nearly penniless and fighting a heroin addiction, his legacy is nevertheless nothing short of colossal. Scientology rules in Hollywood, and it was created by L. Ron Hubbard, who was a protege of Crowley, and who took hypnosis and black magic and made it into a long, drawn-out, and expensive torture session. So Scientology would not be nearly as successful as it is today without its celebrity endorsements. And in the religion of Thelema, it is believed that the history of humanity can be divided into a series of aeons, and each was accompanied by its own forms of magical and religious expression. And the Book of the Law is divided into 3 sections, and talking about the Aeon of Isis, the Aeon of Osiris, and the Aeon of Horus, which is what they believe that we are in right now, the Aeon of Horus. And this is supposed to be the idea of there's no such thing as sin, because Horus is like a selfish child god. And so even the very idea of something being sinful, they would tell you is a lie and an obstacle to your self-fulfillment. And instead, each person will be governed by their own self-will and self-interest. The feminine counterpart to Horus is where we're talking about the Scarlet Woman, the Babylon, Babalon. And Aleister Crowley was very sexist and held to all the misogynistic notions of the Victorian era. He was struggling against excessive repression and never really treated women as anything but sexual playthings, and he wanted them to behave like nymphomaniacs. He only ever used the women in his life for sex or money or both, and most of the women who got involved with him ended up mentally ill or suffering drug addiction. And so on the left is one of his Scarlet Women who he would actually brand with a hot iron on their chest, his version of the mark of the beast, the circle and the cross. And then you have, I put Lady Gaga in there as the Scarlet Woman, which they will dress them in red. You will notice after an initiation or a big performance, they will always reemerge as the Scarlet Woman. So they call their goddess Babylon the mother of abominations. And her god form is based on this, like we were talking about, the sacred whore, Ishtar. And it is believed that she could be invoked to earth, and her role could be filled by actual women as the counterpart to his self as the great beast, and help manifest the energies of what they want in this Aeon of Horus. So Aleister Crowley, he actually believed that many of his lovers were playing this role to the fulfillment of his prophecy, and the Thelemites believe that the Scarlet Woman, as well as the role of the beast, can be fulfilled by any magician who so chooses. So this is what I think that they're trying to put on these girls who are under monarch mind control. When they get deeper in it, they're actually elevated to the level of a Scarlet Woman. So some people will try to whitewash Crowley as a kind of harmless libertarian Dumbledore kind of figure, but the morals outlined in his teachings contain statements that from a humanitarian point of view are way more than objectionable, and his book is anti-compassion, anti-democracy, anti-emotion, anti-sympathy, pity, or brotherly love. And so the chief concern of a Thelemite is following their own individual true will. And so nowhere in the Book of the Law are you instructed to be concerned with the rights of others. And if the doing of your will includes, hurting someone else or thwarting their rights, then so be it. The might makes right. That's the idea of this whole religion. And not only that, they consider whoever can win is deserving, and they even have a dictum, the slaves shall serve. So in occult terms, a Thelemite is a dichotomist, seeing himself as a superior being or a chosen one, and while everyone else is nothing. And the concept of following one's true will takes no account for the fact that we exist in an ecosystem, and it's not a universe unto ourselves because we're sharing the space with everyone else. In the real world, damage to others and your environment equals damage to yourself because we all have to share the space, right? So the Book of the Law is actually based on social Darwinian feudal stratification, and this is what we're talking about, royalty programming. It's the princess and the commoner, right, and the peasant. So Crowley belonged to an elite class. He was born with money, and this dictated his view of the world, and including his view of an ideal world. And one passage revolves around the idea that the slaves shall serve forever. He says, "Yea, deem not change. Ye shall be as ye are, and not other. Therefore the kings of the earth shall be kings forever. The slaves shall serve. There is none that shall be cast down or lifted up. All is as it ever was." So here, his feudal ideas are in full force. And what he's saying is there are kings and wealthy people, and there are slaves and beggars, and nothing in Thelema or Hollywood or monarchy is designed to change this paradigm. So there's no promise that slaves will be set free or that beggars will become rich. So to them, the person is either one or the other, and they give no reason for believing why this should ever change to them. So he actually said there's only one solution: to pick out the diamonds from the clay, cut them, polish them, and set them as they deserve. You will observe that I am advocating an aristocratic revolution, and so I am. And remember that Katy Perry Royal Revolution, right? So his ideal government must lord over and manage hordes of ignorant masses. He said we should have no compunction in utilizing the natural qualities of the bulk of mankind. We do not insist on trying to train sheep or hunt foxes or lecture on history. We look after their physical well-being and enjoy their wool and mutton. In this way, we shall have a contented class of slaves who accept the conditions of existence as they really are and enjoy life with the quiet wisdom of a cattle. So here is a photo from Bohemian Grove, and you can see behind them, this is the representation of their ideal society. So you have a priest in front with a staff and, like a pope-like figure, and then you have the banker, aristocratic class, and then you have the servants who serve them, and then you have, the businessmen, and on until you get down to peasants, and, just this is the way that they feel that society should be run, and Hollywood is their major mode of indoctrination to make you think that this is true also. So, through these art and artifacts, the ancient kings, they really revealed themselves to be militant and pompous imperialists who thought nothing of deporting entire tribes or torturing prisoners of war to build their kingdoms like Babylon and Uruk. And bas reliefs from the cities of Nimrud and Nineveh featuring kings conquering armies, strutting, slaughtering, leading thousands of people, deporting them, making them build these buildings. So whenever you see these great giant, okay, good. Whenever you see these feats of architecture, just remember that, it was built on the backs of real people. And this is actually, the picture is from, what is it? King Sennacherib of Assyria, and he, even in the writings, he gloats and says, I deported them and made them carry the head and molded bricks and subjected them to my slavery. So slavery was a recognized institution from the beginning of time.
and even in Mesopotamian society. And so these temples, palaces, and rich estates were owned owned by, the magician priest class, and they exploited slaves in their temple prostitution. So, if we want to see how the Babylon system is working today, look no further than Hollywood, because this is the spell that, ancient people used to use the stars to navigate and to tell time, and to, to follow the stars was how you got from one place to the other. But now they have everybody looking at these stars in Hollywood who they created instead of the actual stars. So when they were owned by the studio system, that was also a sort of form of slavery. The studio did as much as possible, even dictating social activities, even down to who a certain star would marry. If a star was gay, they would have to get a fake wife. So they pretty much controlled every aspect of these actor and actresses' life. So I guess that's it. On the left, you can see Sargon and Inanna again, and they're standing on the backs of slaves. And Free Your Mind, I think, is one of the best places to combat this slavery. And we're learning all about trauma-based mind control, and we're learning about, just all the different ways that our mind is enslaved. And so what we have to do first is to start to free our mind. Oh, okay. And this starts by freeing your mind, and it starts by sharing it with other people. And so don't let this kind of information get you lonely. I wrote these books so that you would have a tool to share in a way that's easy to get people to understand what you're trying to tell them. It's full color pictures, and it was written for the demographic I was thinking was teenagers, because I think that, children are the future, and we have to educate them in real things instead of just Hollywood and fake school. And so I really hope you enjoyed my talk, and I hope you will check out my book.